Maybe getting your nourishment from sunlight or nature. Okay, think your perception change, and that's what this whole thing is about. And here I have like God's gift is, we eat all of this processed food, which is like, how many calories is all that stuff? It's like 10 times or 100 times the calories. But here we have all in these things, and the ingredients in this is just amazing. And we just have God's natural food, and that's the way you go. But we need that perception change. So how do we get it? We start to look at things in a different perspective. We get centered. When we're centered, even our addiction to people or all the situations in life, we get, we'll intuitively know. And I always read the 9th and 10th step promises. It tells you throughout there what's going to happen in our addiction to any addiction, but even with the food, it says we'll intuitively know. God gave us this gift. We have the perfect, in the hypothalamus, it knows to exact 1 pound. It can figure out the perfect thermostat. But we get in the way with self-centered fear. And one of the things I always talk about, we have the remorse, shame, and guilt. Remember, we can always start the day over. It doesn't matter how much you binged or what you did with the food or with your addiction an hour ago, a minute ago, or yesterday. It doesn't matter. We can start the day over. Or if you were angry, resentful towards somebody, if you were depressed, anxious, whatever it was, we can start the day over. But when we're into again, I always say we do 10 things yesterday that were really, 10 different things. 9 of them were great. We think of the one thing we didn't. And I speak to people all day long. They were good with their abstinence at night. They had a falling down of what they consider that. And then they say, oh, and the next day, and they're remorseful. And they say, I'll never get out of this. And the shame case, and the shame, remorse, and guilt. The way to live life is to move on and ride it like a surfer on a wave, rather than just falling off and falling into the water and then not getting up. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And no, it's progress, not perfection. So nobody has perfect this or perfect that. The most successful people, you know that, the most successful people in the world, in what it was, business or whatever it was, always say they failed nine times, and on the 10th time it went through. So we could get this amazing grace when we stay centered in fit spiritual condition. So when I'm out of the self, when I'm out of sorts, and when I'm into my addiction, it's because I'm not in fit spiritual condition. We have a way on page 86, right? We review our day, and we said when we're into the self and self-centeredness. Food is self-centeredness. Believe me, it's all about me. The ego has a great idea. I'll eat all this food. It's momentary pleasure. All of it's momentary pleasure. So if you want true happiness, joy, and bliss, get centered and enjoy and become one with everything, not finite with the food or any addiction, or with your resentment, your anger, your fear. It's all related to the same thing. It's all about the self and the ego. Everything else, look, all I got to say is I've seen it all, and everything else we try only makes the addiction stronger. I used to go to, it's interesting, I'd go to certain these Overeaters Anonymous meetings, and I realized the addiction only got worse because I go to the meeting, or even with other meetings, when I speak about, I was in the problem. I was saying, well, the food does this, and I have to stay away, I have to resist it, I have to do this, not changing my perception. The same with when I talked about people in my life. Well, I got to show them who I think I am. I got to, do this. I got to explain to them, rather than just getting centered and having that consciousness where we rise above our problems. In the big book it talks about that. And when people bother us or situations come up, we can only sit there and smile. So most cravings aren't real. It's that stinking thinking. You can observe it, become friends with your emotions and feel them. And when we get fear of them, and we try to resist them, we give anything we resist strength. Right? If you resist something, you're giving it strength. So the whole key is this, is not to resist anything, to get centered and have your perception change. Your body's God's temple. And also, when you're in a self-centered fear, you can't even feel your stomach anymore. You're paralyzed by fear. Ever hear that? Paralyzed by fear. So we want to look at life through God consciousness, right? Higher power. We had all the time. We have a spiritual side, and we have the human side. The human side is always looking for that momentary pleasure. Momentary pleasure. On the other side is just as much pain. Because somebody says, well, look, I got a promotion at work and I feel great. I really feel on top of the world. But then the next day they see somebody who's a boss over them or got a bigger promotion or whatever it is, or making more money, more success, and more acknowledgement, and then they feel terrible. Because they're putting there on a false premise. It says in the big book here, we just read, knowing the truth from the false. The truth is that there's glorious, glorious foods out there, and mine is whole food, plant-based, one ingredient, and I have here some of the, and I showed you the fruits, and I even have different things. But anything that's processed, that's unnatural in life, it's like going after something that's synthetic, right? Synthetic knowledge. And again, these corporations, you want to be slaves to them, you should really just get upset about that they're running your lives and controlling you. And they spend all their day with the scientists and psychologists trying to figure out what's going to be poisonous in the foods. So you want to be a prisoner? We're prisoner towards that, or prisoner. Look, we have a release here, a spiritual awakening, where we don't have to be involved with the self anymore. We can move on. So here we go. We have the answer, a solution here. And it talks, I'm going to go, this is a very powerful page. I was reading on page 57 in We Agnostics. And it really, a lot of times I talk about about this and the food a little bit, but here it is, real faith and belief. And that change of thinking comes about when we overpowered by our spiritual side, our consciousness of spiritual, being really spiritual awakening, where these other things in life don't become important anymore. So when we get our spiritual bread, I call it, spirituality satisfies us. Do we need people? No anymore. Or we may not need food or addiction or drugs or alcohol. And they do call alcohol spirits because they're trying to get that spiritual feeling from those things. It's interesting. A lot of these things, we take them because they numb us. So we don't have to do that stinking thinking, right? Whether it's drugs, alcohol, or food. Because we're believing when we grew up, our teachers or society told us we had to be successful, we had to control things. If we control more things, more successful, more material things, we'd be happy. And it's just not the answer. It's momentary pleasure. If you want all joy and happiness, it's inside of us. It's just there. And the only thing is we're blocking out step 4, the defects of character related to the ego. The self. What is page 62 in the big book? Selfishness, self-centeredness. That is our problem. And it also says after that, in the next paragraph, we realize the problem is ourselves. Sometimes I'll start out the meeting as that I'm Bob, I got this addiction, that addiction, and my problem is Bob. When I started to realize that was my spiritual awakening, towards the food too, my problem was my thinking. And then slowly, it talks about the educational variety here, you start changing your thinking. But again, what a lot of times I see happen is, and with myself, I'll bring myself back to square one. I'll be having a spiritual change and I'll start to look at like even the water. I say this alone is the greatest diet food here, but it's God's gift. You wouldn't want it any other way. But what happens is, so if I go off, a little bit off the wagon, as they say, then I'm back to square one. I'm in the guilt, the shame, and remorse. Not being, that brings me back into addiction. So we can be glorious in whatever we do every day. We can't please everybody. Sometimes we do the same with people. We try to please everybody. We want everybody to act a certain way, or just letting go and letting that consciousness come in. Intuitively we'll know